In today's Hiwatt soundbite, we're getting actively involved while tracking vocals. Well, just like many of you, throughout my career, I've logged literally thousands of hours of tracking vocals in the studio. And through that experience, no question, there's been some key techniques that I picked up along the way that have really helped me in capturing a better vocal sound. So I want to share a couple of these ideas. And of course, as usual, the best way we can probably share any ideas when we can actually hear what we're talking about. So I've gone ahead and set up a vocal mic and I've got my headphones ready. Before we jump into that, I just want to cover one thing really briefly. As engineers, we have just one opportunity to capture any given performance. So I want to encourage you early on in your engineering career to develop the habit of just being prepared. And that means going an extra mile in almost every moment of being in a studio where you're always kind of thinking ahead and preparing yourself to be in the situation where if something goes down that's magical, that just happens on the floor, that you capture it in the best possible way that you can. It will pay you dividends like you can't even believe. There will be times that you look back and go, wow, am I ever glad that I had that set up right or that I was prepared for that moment. Because no matter how carefully we plan how we're gonna record our session, stuff just happens. Magic happens. If you form this habit early enough in your career, it becomes second nature to where you aren't thinking about it anymore. You don't actually have to go out of your way to be prepared. You just sort of are always. And it's a great practice to get into, and I strongly encourage you to be prepared. Okay, so for today's session, I've just set up my kind of go-to vocal mic in my studio. That's a Mojave MA200. This is a vacuum tube mic. It's got a killer sounding Jensen transformer on its output. And I've got that matched up today with my API 7600, which is a channel strip from API that has a mic preamp, a compressor, and an EQ built into it. Okay, so the first thing I want to kind of cover, and one of the most important things, is the pad switch. I'm referring to a passive attenuation device. Typically, engineers refer to that as a pad button. We'll see that in a number of different places in the studio. We'll almost certainly see a pad switch on our mic preamp. We'll probably see one on a direct injection box on stage if it's an active box. Some microphones even have pad switches built directly into the mic itself. This microphone does not have one, but like a AKG C414, that has a number of pad settings on it. Well, I recommend that you never use the pad switch on a microphone for any reason, unless you absolutely need to. If that capsule is being overloaded by an extremely loud sound source or something, then there may be a scenario where a use of a pad on a microphone would make sense. Generally, it doesn't make any sense at all, and here's why. It's important to understand where that pad is. On any condenser microphone, there's a set of active electronics in that mic that's responsible for boosting the signal of that capsule to a studio line level that can be sent down a mic cable. Well, if we take a pencil and take that microphone and we engage that, say, 10 dB pad on the microphone, what we're essentially doing is lowering the output of the capsule of the actual pickup before it gets to the gain stage, to the active electronic stage of that mic. So essentially, we're lowering the sensitivity of the microphone, okay? But what we haven't done is we haven't changed anything about that set of electronics. That active set of electronics in the microphone has a fixed noise floor. It has a self noise, it's called. That never changes. So lowering the sensitivity of the mic means that on the console side, we're going to end up reaching for the gain knob and turning it up. Well, you know, you're going to be raising the noise floor. You've changed all of the characteristics of that sound. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I feel as strongly about the pad on a mic preamp as I do on a microphone. In my experience, nothing degrades the sound of what I'm working on more than by inserting that pad. Let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so I got this Mojave mic plugged into my API. There's no EQ on. There's a little bit of compression going on right now. I'll back off on that just a hair. Well, if I want to insert my pad and turn the preamp up, the gain knob, like to match the same level, I'll go ahead and do that right now. I just did that. So if I read Electric's Warp Factory, 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 Electric's Warp Factory. Okay, so no question, you can hear clearly that when I insert the pad on this mic pre, everything just kind of, the air kind of just disappears on me. Like there's this crisp kind of breath of air that exists on this microphone when I speak into it like this, that sort of vanishes when I start to talk through the pad. So notice the sound change. It sounds all dead and weird versus this, which is just open and bright. If I know that pad has that kind of destructive effect on my voice, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to go out of my way to do everything I can to not have to use that thing. I want this microphone preamp to sing. You know, in other sessions, I've shared this idea of not pushing the envelope so much. Stop pushing the envelope into the digital domain. We're talking about a different world here right now. We're talking analog. My voice being captured by this mic and going into a mic pre. I want everything in that chain to be as hot as physically possible before clipping. Literally. Now I'm going to print to a very nominal level on my digital system, but on the input side, on the analog side of this preamp, I want my API to sing. I want this thing to be right on the edge of distortion all the time. Why? It sounds about 10 times better. It means I'm going to have a much more active role while the vocal tracking is going on, because I'm going to be constantly adjusting this preamp, because when the singer, you know, when I've got that big fat verse vocal sound going on and it sounds killer, and then we come up to the pre-chorus and then the chorus, I have to make some adjustments because that singer typically is belting out way louder kind of thing. And I'll work with my singer. I mean, in this studio, I set my singer up right beside me and I work. And I love that scenario. In many other scenarios, the singer's behind a piece of glass. No matter what the case is, use the visual reference you have. You know, if you're really in sync with your singer and really locked up, you've got enough lead time to make all the adjustments you need on your mic pre. One of the reasons I love the API 7600 is it's got a continuously variable gain pot on the input. And that is a beautiful thing. It's quiet, never makes a sound. So I can literally ride every single line as I track it to tape, because again, my goal is to try and capture that vocal in the most big, full sound that I can at all times. I can always thin a track out, but there are things that this voice and this capsule can do, if captured properly, that I can never dream about recreating with an equalizer or compressor. I mean, there's just a magic that can happen right there at the exact moment of recording. And that's it. You only have that one opportunity. So I encourage you to have a very active role when it comes to recording vocals. Don't just set and forget and go grab a cup of coffee. Have that constant relationship and that constant visual and the feedback with your singer. When you start to work really closely with a vocalist, you'll get to a point where there'll be all kinds of communication going on where you're not speaking to one another. It's just visual. And that visual reference that I have for my singer can do wonders when it comes to, you know, anticipating what's coming down the pipe and giving me time, the ample lead time to make the adjustment on my preamp. So I hope this approach helps you record better sounding vocals. Well, thank you very much for sitting in on today's session. And if you feel this session has value, please consider subscribing to my channel. And by all means, go ahead and share this session with a friend or colleague.